Enjoyed today, and I want to welcome you onto the Rembrandt main room for the last keynote of the day. The last keynote of today will be by Marzieh, and it will be about the art of language.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for the introduction. Last keynote, Friday night, evening, so I know you're all probably tired. It's been a great conference, though, wasn't it? How did you like it? So I do want to take a moment to actually ask all of the organizers and volunteers to stand, please, and let's give a round of applause for what they've been organizing, what they've been doing. Really nice. There are some in the back, some here. Great job. So what I'm going to talk today is about language. So I'm Marzieh. I'm a research scientist at Cohere for AI. We are a research lab that work on fundamental research questions, specifically on language models. And today, I want to start by talking about language. So I'm speaking in English. I'm hoping everyone here understands me, so everyone speaks English. Can you raise your hand if you speak at least one language? I assume English. Great. Keep your hands up if you speak at least 2 languages. Nice. How about 3 languages? So we lose some. I want to see how far we can go. 4 languages. I see a few hands still. 5? 5. I see still some hands up. 6 languages. I don't see any hands up. So this is a very multilingual crowd. I don't think I have to emphasize to you guys how important it is to have representation of languages in language models. I think many of you, most of you probably, your native language is not English, and we know language models are not that great in other languages. So the goal of my talk today, and what I'm hoping you take away from this is, first of all, why we should keep studying multilingual frameworks. Second, I'm going to talk to you about how we built a multilingual language model in a community effort at Cohere for AI. And then lastly, what are still open questions and challenges in multilingual development? Right, so multilingual does matter. And one big reason is because we all speak different languages, and we want to interact with these language models in these languages. But there's also other reasons for that. Language models are great, and a lot of how they were developed to be where they are now comes from open public research in the field of machine translation. The original language models, before the large part being added there, the attention mechanism, the transformer architecture, even like the BP tokenizer that is currently used in many models, these were all developments in the field of machine translation. And the big reason for that, in my opinion, is that translation multilinguality is really a hard task. You have to understand language in 2 languages in order to transfer from one to another. And so you need sophisticated, smart models to capture that. If this reason is not good enough to still study multilingual problems, we also do see there have been research that shows that languages can help each other. So if you have language A in your model, and then you add data for language B, you can potentially see improvement in performance in some specific tasks for language A. So there is cross-lingual transfer that can happen. Of course, it doesn't happen with any data mixture of any languages that you do, but there is a big value in high-resource languages helping low-resource languages. And then lastly, actually in the previous talk, there was also mentioned briefly how it's also important from the user's point of view. So there have been this study looking at jailbreaking GPT-4 model with prompts in different languages. And they've seen that for, if they tried translating essentially from English to these other languages, if they tried high-resource and mid-resource languages, the success rate of jailbreaking was quite low. But if they tried low-resource languages, the success rate was quite high, getting GPT-4 to give output that is potentially harmful. And this is like translating back to English again. So a user that speaks, that doesn't speak a low-resource language can still experience these harmful attacks. And then we talk about multilinguality, but it's also, there are a lot of like nuances and complexities in individual languages as well. So for instance, we might say that, oh, this language model supports the language Arabic. But there are a lot of different varieties, to different dialects. For some languages, different scripts. For what they are under the umbrella name of one language. So it is really important to study these different nuances and different languages for having a more representative model. And that's what we did in the AYA project. So the AYA project that we started last year was an open science initiative, and our main goal was to accelerate multilingual progress. More concretely, the main goal was to create and release data sets in a multilingual setting, train state-of-the-art models that are multilingual. And it was also very important for us to do this by focusing on where, how, and by whom ML progress is accomplished. So what this means is that if we want to represent different languages in a model, we also need the perspective of the people who speak those languages, because they are the best to actually guide us or to know like a lot of the details and nuances you all know in your own languages, how it's really hard maybe to translate sometimes some concepts. So this project has a few different parts. I want to focus first on the open science part. So the part about building a community, which I think is also an interest of this audience here. We started this project by targeting 100 languages. So this is a list of languages, and I do actually want to do a test to see like how many speakers we have here. So I guess how many Dutch speakers we have in the room, maybe? Nice, there's a lot. How many Persian speakers? I'm originally from Iran. I see some hands. Nice. How many, maybe, Shona speakers? Nice, we have 2 representations. You already see the distribution of going from high resource to mid resource to low resource languages. And this is only 100. There's a lot more in the world. So this was just a start. But for us, we wanted to start from somewhere, and this was where we did. But thinking about why these models are not that good in a lot of these languages, the problem for a lot of the cases goes back to the data, right? So there are not enough data for a lot of the languages. But why is collecting the data challenging? So first of all, I think some people, at least, consider working with data and collecting data a unglamorous and, in my opinion, underrated though, job. So it's like really with minimum amount of effort, time, money, everything, they want to get the best data. When we talk about multilinguality and all of these people from around the world, there's also the question of how do we align all of these people in different languages, what we are aiming to collect, like what is the goal of this data, what is the format, what we consider a good example, what we consider a bad example. And then lastly, just logistics. So if you want to work with people around the world, how do we meet? There's time zone-wise, it's not really possible. Like all of these really simple, really maybe small things that would hinder working with a large group of people when you start a project like this. And it was a large group of people. So we launched for AYA, we launched a Discord community, and we really didn't think how it will go, but we ended up, by the end of the project, there were more than 3,000 people on this community from 119 countries. So really passionate people, researchers, ML, NLP, but also non-ML people, just passionate about preserving their language in this data set that will that the plan was to release openly. So we have a large community. How do we handle essentially all of these communications? So what we did, we defined these regional leads. So people, volunteers in our community for different continents and regions, and each of these people then would work with language ambassadors in their region. So for each language, we found at least one person in the community who speaks that language or comes from that background, so that they can actually make sure what we are collecting about that language is as accurate and as representative as possible. And we did a lot of different things to engage this community. So we had like weekly meetups, just talking open for anyone who would join, talking about what is the goal of this project, and asking them to contribute examples, and just getting to know each other. We were a diverse group of people from around the world, so we tried to make it fun also. So just like making playlists, everyone would contribute music from their country, their language, and then we listened to all of these music from different genres, different places in the world. We also did something like recipe index. Like on Discord, people would post recipes of local and cultural meals that they have, and then some other person from another part of the world would pick that recipe and make that and share their experience. There's actually one Persian recipe there that I shared that someone, I think Lara in Ireland, she made that, and she loved it. And we constantly, everyone in this, shared what motivated us to do this. So all of these examples might also sound silly, but when you talk about building a community of people who come together for something that they're passionate about, in this case, a lot of them preserving their language, a lot of them were not represented at all in the current language models. It's important to build these connections, to give space for people to get together, work together, and then as a result of that, you build something nice and good, hopefully. And that's what we did. So this data collection process, it took 8 months last year, and one of the main outputs of this was the data artifacts that we created. So first, there is the Aya dataset, which is, and so I think I didn't mention it. So the goal was to create instruction-style data for fine-tuning language models. I think you are all familiar what this style is. So it's like pairs of prompts and completions, like questions and answers. And for the Aya dataset subset, we ask people to write like on a blank, like from scratch. So we really wanted to not steer them toward particular topics. Like it could be about anything. The ask for them was try to include maybe references or like something about your culture and country. Like this can be a reference to like something in your literature, a question about geography about your country that you wouldn't really find in an English or like Western data set. So this, the Aya data set is really valuable. We ended up covering 65 languages in this data set, brand new examples, and there are also like very specific and cultural examples there. But as you can imagine, manually created, so it's really hard to scale. So size-wise, it's still a good size, but then we wanted to also scale on size. So maybe sacrificing quality a little bit and going through synthetic and automatic ways. And that's how we created the Aya collection. So the collection would then include a lot of just different subsets, translations from English datasets to these 100 languages, also like templating existing datasets in some of these non-English languages. So we have like higher coverage, higher volume, but potentially noisier data, especially for the tail of languages that the translation might not be that great. And these two datasets are released. So the Aya dataset and Aya collection, they are the largest multilingual instruction datasets with open license to be used for anyone who wants to work with the collection as a whole, or also just wants to focus on their own language and pick that subset. So the next part was, OK, so what do we do with this data? So it's really great. Can we build good models with this? And that was what we did. So the next step of the project was essentially using this. And by the way, the data, the IA collection is huge, so 500 million examples. So it's not really, especially with the sizes that we were working with, you don't really need to use all of that. So in this part of the project, for training a multilingual model, we looked into sampling a quality subset depending on different features of the data, created our training data, and then fine-tune models and release them openly. So first, it's the IA 101 model. So this model supports 101 languages. We use a pre-trained model, MT5, and the 101 language actually comes from that model. So MT5 was, at the time, still a base model that has the highest coverage of languages. And then we use the SFT data that the prompts and completions that we collected, release this model along with the paper, which also won the best paper at ACL this year. We are very proud of that. And then a few months later, we released another version of the IA model, the IA 23. This version, we use the Cohere command model as a base. So the coverage of languages there were lower. So we support 23 languages. But the quality of the base model is much higher. And then we use almost the same data, but also changed the data mixture a little bit. And yeah, so this is a really powerful in two sizes, 8B, more developer-friendly, and 35B model. And we are currently working on the next model. So I think in a month we will release another version. So just keep an eye on that. And the IA models that we released, they have been really doing well. So they have outperformed at the time, so that's a few months ago, the state-of-the-art multilingual model. All of the like Mistral, Llama 2, like a few models that we, Gemma 101, that we evaluated at the time. So these are on multilingual benchmarks. We also evaluated on open-ended generations, and the IA 23 model outperformed all of these models. Right now, with the Llama 3 and Gemma 2.2, we are actually having like a competition with multilingual models, and we are hoping with our next release, we will get them. So I talked about evaluation very briefly, 2 slides, but it's a very big part of development of models. And when we talk about multilingual evaluation, it's even more challenging. So when we think about evaluation in general for the language models, I think there are like currently 2 main hurdles. So one is how this really compromise of like having an evaluation set that is specific for a particular domain or task, or like something that you are very interested in, versus a very general, broad, across-the-board evaluation. And it's really hard to design that. And even if you do that, the risk of intentionally or unintentionally contamination happening is also quite high. So with most of the evaluation sets that are released, in the next iteration of the models, they might end up having that in their training data, and then they are not that useful anymore. And it's more severe for multilingual evals. So as part of the IA initiative, we also wanted to release evaluation sets to help progress and development in multilingual models. So the first data set that we released is in an open-ended evaluation suite. And this was actually part of the original IA data set. So we set aside essentially a split of that data that can be used for testing models. And we have been using that in also testing our own models. It does have a few subsets. So again, we are back to this balance of quality versus quantity. If we want to increase the number of languages, then it gets harder and harder to find like manual annotators to check all of those languages. So what we ended up doing is we have like a subset that covers 7 languages that is fully human curated, and then we machine translate a subset into 100 languages, so like broadening and deepening essentially, increasing the coverage of languages, but then it is translated data. So there might be some translation artifacts there. And then more recently, we started looking into, so that was an open-ended generation evaluation. So we started looking into general knowledge and factual evaluation of models in a multilingual setting. So if you're familiar with evaluation in general, right now at least with language models, the MMLU dataset is a go-to classic dataset to test, and it's a collection of college, high school exams on different topics. And it's a go-to data set to evaluate models about the general knowledge. So what we did in this project, we had human annotators look at different examples in the MMLU English data set, and we asked them to label whether you need general knowledge to answer this question, whether you need cultural knowledge, or like it's a mix. And then we had like multiple annotators per example. And we looked at how much they agree and how much you needed like one versus multiple, like cultural versus general knowledge. And it's actually a really nice cluster of 2 different topics. So for STEM topics, you have like mathematics there, astronomy, computer science. There's a high agreement that it's just like a general knowledge. You don't need cultural something information. And then on the other side of the board, for the social topics, we have, what do we have? So like moral science, US history, high school European history, professional law. So you can imagine that going from one country to another, the topics would be different. The topic is the same, but the content would be different. And this actually gave us the idea that maybe if we want to evaluate language models in a multilingual setting on general knowledge, we actually need this distinction of math is math everywhere, but history, different countries have their own take on the history. So what we are currently working on, and we will be releasing soon, is 2 multilingual evaluation sets. One, MMLU agnostic, second, MMLU global exams. So in the first one, we took actually the subset that we, like the STEM subset essentially of MMLU with our annotator labels, and we translate that and also run post-edits to 40 languages. So these would be like very general scientific topics, essentially. And then in the second data set, the global exam, that was again another community effort. And I think I want to just go back to the IA community that we created. So there was like this Discord. We did this data collection process last year. And the Discord is still active. And like, for instance, this year, we wanted to collect this data. We posted about it, and people were still interested. So I think the value of building a community that is at least like lasting for this long was really clear to us in this scenario. What we did in the global exam project was asking people to find college exams, high school exams, like different local exams about, especially about topics that are specific to them. Again, like history, literature, law, all of these topics. Find them which are often in PDF. They haven't even been processed. And then we provided the support to process these from image to getting to the text data. So essentially creating a global exam consisting of like multiple local exams from different places in the world, ended up covering 50 languages. This project is also in collaboration with a team at Swiss AI. We will be releasing both of these data sets soon, and our hope is that for evaluation of language models, this will be a huge landmark. Right, so I talked about why multilinguality is important. I also talked about how we built this multilingual initiative, essentially. It's not, there are like multiple data sets, multiple models, multiple evaluations, and it's still ongoing. There are still a lot that needs to be covered. I also want to now discuss what are still open questions that I hope that some curious people in this room also still would continue studying this. And one big one is factuality and truthfulness. Maybe in another word, hallucination. So that's something that we know happens with language models a lot. When we, like, even in English, that's a big problem. But when we talk about multilingual, that is even a bigger problem of not having data sets, not being able to measure that, and as a result, not being able to work on improving on that. The second open challenge is evaluation still. So I talked about our efforts, but, and I keep saying multilingual, but it's still like there are a lot of languages that are not included. There are a lot of, so there's no real one solution fit all. And it's also quite interesting how you can build these different evaluation sets, but then models would perform differently on different evaluation sets. So like here, for instance, there are like the same model on two different question answering data sets. On one, it's like the highest ranking, on the other is the lowest ranking. So what does it mean? Like, which model would I pick? When we talk about evaluation, there is the part about like building these individual sets. And then there is maybe the bigger picture part of like how to compare these models based on your use case or like on a general performance. So that's still very much open and, again, quite severe in the case of multilingual. The third one, which, again, very similar to the previous talk about jailbreaking and security, is how safe these models are and red teaming these models. So there are privacy issues, there are misinformation, discrimination, and toxic content. And depending on the use case, I think the weights of these might be different, like what you prefer to happen and what you rather not happen might be different. But it is still true that these are cases that will happen in the current setup of how the models are used. And we do need a substantial study on understanding this and mitigating these issues. And to not sound like a broken record, but in English, this is really the case, but multilingual is even more severe. And then lastly, data. So we talked about how we built that, the IR collection data sets, right? It took a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of blood and sweat behind it. But also, like, the question is, what is really good data? Like, what would you prioritize when you want to create or select your data? And then also, there are other questions, like, whose data are you using? Whose data are you allowed maybe to use or not? And then, again, going back to the language, so how many languages do you support? What are you not supporting? What data do you need more to support these more languages? So these are all open questions, and we at Cohere for AI, we are doing research on all of these, and I think it's a fun time to actually work on multilingual models. Right, so what I want to wrap up by just going back to how we started. So I think we can, especially also at the beginning of this talk, this conference in general, we can all agree that language models are great. They do some really creative, really fun things, but they still have a long way to go, especially when we think about particular languages, maybe not so much high resource going down the distribution. And what we have experienced is that if you do want your model to capture AI or to capture the information in the word, you also do need the input of this word. So it's really important to get people involved in in the creation, in building these models. And then lastly, something that I think very important is that multilingual framework in general is quite complex. Like every problem that we have in English, there's like a new dimension of language, and per language there are different complexities. And I don't think it's really working on multilingual problems is not really for, at least like not the only reason for like hoping for a better world when everyone's language is presented in a model, but also I think it benefits everyone, like because how development of machine learning we have seen happening mostly in machine translation to get to where we are with language models. So I think it's really important to involve, to still work on this complex problem and involve everyone. Right, so lastly, I just want to give a huge shout out to all of my collaborators on this project. So the IA project, I think very clearly it was not me alone, and I just wanted to give, to highlight different people that worked on these projects, and we have released different papers. We also have released all of the data sets and models on Hugging Face, and we are working on releasing more. So check it out. I would be very excited to see what you can build with this data set, these models. And yeah, let me know how it goes. Thank you. So any questions? I actually want to have a lot of questions. I think it's mostly, I want to hear back from you. What do you think?
I'm going to start here.
Hi, thank you for sharing this information. And I have a question. Do you think it's possible that if you train the model on a certain set of languages, that it can still perform to some extent to the languages that were not in the train set, so unseen languages?
That's a very good question. So actually, in one of the projects, we had, I didn't mention so there are the extra slides that I have. So we did release a red teaming data set here, covering 8 languages, but our model only supports 6 of those languages, so we had like 2 unseen languages. And in all of our mitigation techniques and everything, we also evaluated on those 2 unseen ones, and we did see them getting better as well. So even though the model is not supporting those languages, I don't think it's a general rule, to be honest. It really depends also on the combination of the languages. That's what makes it more complex. Like, what language can help the other? Like, if you increase or decrease like a certain property of that language, how does that impact another language? But there's definitely a lot of cross-lingual transfer, whether positive or negative, can happen. So we have seen catastrophic forgetting happening. So a language that you were really good by adding a new language, you can get worse on. But we have also seen languages helping each other. There is a lot of research in that area. It actually goes back before language models, again, machine translation. And in particular on supervised machine translation era. So that's, I recommend checking out some of those papers for more.
Right here.
Hi. Thank you so much for the talk. And also, I'm here. Hello. I can stand up a bit.
OK, thanks.
Yeah. And thanks also so much for this work. This is very important work. And I think especially the evals and the data sets are the parts that we all often take for granted. But it's really good to see the hard work that goes into that, and especially for these underprivileged languages. So thank you for that. But my question is, there's this paper called Which Humans, which basically looks into, when we talk about human performance of LLMs, which humans are we talking about exactly? Because there are these biases, like you say, in English, but speaking English also means you speak that in a sort of cultural way. So what they did is they let ChatGPT fill in the world values survey and see with which countries it correlated the most. So I would be really, really interested to see if your guys' models score actually close on the World Values Human Survey in the language of those countries, if that makes sense. So if you would ask the World Values Human Survey to people from Iran, and then you ask in Iranian your model the same questions, would those cultural values also align? Or is it just saying Iranian or Persian things in a very kind of culturally English way still? Is that something that you've considered in the evals or in your research?
Yeah, that's a very good question and a few references there. So I start from last. What we are looking, actually what we are currently looking, one potential project is studying translationese in the output of the model. And what we mean by translationese, and I think you can all you all know examples like that, that when you read an output of a language model and it semantically it looks okay, like it looks like your language is really like, it's a nice sentence, but it also feels odd. Like you would say like a native speaker wouldn't use this particular word. So these are the artifacts that the model was trained on translation data, and then it's not super aligned with what is like the more organic way of talking in a language. So we have one study on project on that we haven't started yet, but we are planning that. And then going back to the earlier about this, like the word, what is it exactly? Word moral data set. I think it's actually a nice data set that we have looked at for different English-speaking countries. So we actually had a project on looking at getting annotators from US, UK, I think Nigeria and Australia. So like different places that English is the first language there. And we asked them to label a few examples, and they were actually quite different. So like even the same language, but just different backgrounds and different cultures. So I can imagine very easily that with a multilingual model, that would also be the case. But I think that's a very interesting question to study.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks a lot for the talk. I think you got a lot of people excited about multilingual models. I was wondering what excites personally you in the application of large language models in the setting where you focus particularly on like making it learn new languages?
I mean, a lot of things. So I'm training a multilingual model at home. I have a 2-year-old, so he's learning Persian, Dutch, and English growing up here. So, and it's very fascinating to see how he combines different words from different languages and create new ones. I also, I did my PhD here at UFA on machine translation. I have been since forever just fascinated with language understanding, getting models to understand language. And I think for me personally, it's just the connections that you can make. I just see how LLMs are great. Like at the end of the day, it might be tricky to get them to work in a chatbot, in a bank application. But when you just creatively ask them questions, brainstorm ideas, there are a lot of things that they do great. And I would love for that to be the experience of everyone, like my mom, my grandparents, like everyone. So I think that also is a big part of why I think it's important to work on these languages.
Yes, perfect. Thanks for the presentation. Again, very important work. I'm curious, following up on this idea that English is like the universal language, but it's also quite specific in certain ways when we think about it. Like, my Persian friends tell me that it's very difficult in Persian and English because you don't really have this he, she distinction, so it's like, it's not gendered in the same way. And I'm curious whether that is a benefit in some ways when we study languages. We can actually begin to understand biases and other things better. Like, I'm thinking about, have you done any thoughts about that? Maybe even work on that?
Yeah, that's it. Can you hear me? Yeah, that's also, let me see if I have that slide. I might have. That's a very good question. OK, I might not have this here. But there have been studies on, no, I don't have that. I'm sorry. A lot of just there are existing data sets and existing work about looking at these, capturing bias. Actually, a very good application. I might actually personally be biased. All of my examples are from translation, but there is a good translation data set that when you, they look at the data set is about like sentences about different people working different jobs in English, and then they translate. I think they have like Italian, Spanish, like a few languages. And then when you translate, there are hints in the sentence that you should know the gender of this person. The doctor shouldn't be the male. Like there is like another word that indicates like it should be female. And then when you translate in that language with the gendered pronoun, then you can identify whether the model is actually, like how much it is biased, how much inductive bias it has in the gender prediction versus how much it understands the context, gets the hint of the later word, I guess, that would reference this gender. There are a few data sets, but there are also not really a lot. Like I know this is the Vino-MT data set, so one data set with like 5 languages, I think. So I think there's still a lot that can be studied there. I think that makes it, like going back to these differences between languages, that makes it actually more interesting and exciting to work on. If it was like just like word-by-word translation, then it wouldn't be so interesting. And I'm, in general, in favor of just trying to support all of these different nuances so that we can also mitigate these, for instance, biases that we have. But yeah, I think that's also an interesting and important line of work to do research.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. Right now, at this moment, the Q1 2.5x billion models are being tested for Chinese censorship. Do you see your models and research contribute to this kind of openness? Can you see a role in that?
So you mean, what do you, yeah, can you elaborate a little bit?
Okay, yeah, no problem. So politic-sensitive information is being, right now, being exposed as being censored from the Q1 models.
Ah, right, okay.
So what is your partake on that?
So with the development of these models, we don't do any sort of like filtering of the data or any guardrails necessarily for, I guess, like any particular political party or anything like that. I don't have a lot of, I think it's just how different countries do different work. I cannot really speak why that's happening for the Q1 model. What I can say is that I think the value of open sourcing the data, the models, is that transparency would then help with accountability. So if you are clear that, like the data set, for instance, if your data set has hidden bias and then you don't make that open, then you are not sharing like why the model is biased or like how it's biased. But once you make that open, then someone else, like how open research is done, so someone else can notice that, oh, there's this issue in this data, in this model, and then they can build on top of that and make that better, hopefully. I think that is a case that is not quite solved, really. But for the cases of like the gender bias, for instance, like these cases, these are really the cases that we had the first models, we saw how really bad they were, and then there were like some works on trying to make them better in mitigating these sorts of biases.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Marzieh, for your wonderful keynote. I'm sure there are many more questions, but we are going to continue to the closing notes now. Give one final round of applause for Marzieh.
Thank you.
And for the closing notes, I would like to invite 2 people on